The message came on a Tuesday morning. No warning. No build-up. Just a signal, hitting every screen, every device, every government on the planet at the exact same moment. And there he was. Ambassador Thelkor of the Galactic Council. Tall, silver-skinned, for unblinking eyes staring straight into the camera like he'd done this 100 times before. Because he probably had. People of Earth, he began, his voice calm and measured, almost polite. Your species has been observed for 50 years, ever since you achieved faster-than-light travel. The Galactic Council has determined that humanity is now ready to join galactic civilization. He paused. Just long enough to make you feel like that was good news. However, this membership requires certain accommodations. That word, accommodations, hung in the air like a threat dressed up in a suit. In the Oval Office, the president sat surrounded by her cabinet and military advisors, all watching the same screen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just listened as Thelkor laid it out, one condition at a time, each one heavier than the last. Humanity would hand over control of its military to Council oversight. No more making your own defense decisions. They'd decide what was a threat and what wasn't. Any expansion into new star systems? Council approval required. Human laws? Subject to Council review. And if they didn't like a law, they could veto it. Earth's natural resources, the same ones humans had worked and bled and built civilizations on top of, would be cataloged, and a portion would go directly to Council needs. In exchange? Advanced technology. Access to trade networks. The protection of Council forces. Oh, and a deadline. 30 days to accept. Refusal, Thelkor added almost as an afterthought, will result in your classification as a rogue civilization, with all associated consequences. The screen went dark. The room stayed silent for a long moment. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone in the room is thinking the same thing but nobody wants to say it first. The general spoke up. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a man who had spent his entire career thinking about threats and how to respond to them. What he said next wasn't a battle plan. It was just the truth. They're asking us to become a protectorate. We'd have no real sovereignty. The Secretary of State nodded. She'd already been doing her homework, pulling up records of every species that had ever joined the Council. The pattern was impossible to miss. Every single one of them had given up their independence. Not just their military. Not just their economy. Everything. The Council controlled cultural development. The direction of their science. What they were allowed to build and where they were allowed to go. And if we refuse, the president asked, trade embargo. Travel restrictions. Possibly military action. It had happened before, to civilizations that thought they had a choice. The Council has 8,000 warships, the secretary said quietly. We have 200. The president let that number settle. 8,000. 200. She didn't need a calculator. So our choice is submit or be crushed. Those appear to be the options. What followed was hours of debate. Real, raw, uncomfortable debate. The kind where nobody actually wins the argument because there's no good answer. Some said refusal was suicide, plain and simple. You don't fight a number like 8,000. You survive and you find another way. But others couldn't let it go that easily. Humanity hadn't gotten here by rolling over. Centuries of struggle, wars fought, systems built, rights earned, all of it pointed toward one idea, that people have the right to govern themselves. That freedom isn't something you trade away for protection and technology, no matter how good the deal sounds on paper. How do you just hand that over? How do you look at everything your species built and say, sure, someone else can be in charge now? The president finally called for silence. She'd heard enough. She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing. The world deserved to hear this directly. From her. Set up an address, she said. Tomorrow morning. The United Earth Assembly chamber was packed wall to wall. Every seat taken. Every representative from every nation sitting in a silence so thick you could almost feel it pressing down on the room. Outside, on streets and squares and living rooms across the planet, billions of people were gathered around screens, waiting. Just waiting. The president walked to the podium slowly. No rush. She gripped the edges with both hands, took a breath, and looked out at the faces staring back at her. My fellow humans, she began, 3 days ago, we received an ultimatum from the Galactic Council. They gave us a choice, surrender our sovereignty and join their civilization as subordinates, or refuse and face isolation. Possibly destruction. She let that land. I have spent the past 72 hours talking to world leaders, military advisors, scientists, historians, and ordinary people. I've read every analysis. I've looked at every possible outcome. And I've made a decision. The chamber was so quiet you could hear people breathing. For thousands of years, humanity has been moving toward one idea. Just one. That people have the right to govern themselves. We've gone to war over it. We've died for it. We've torn down empires and built new ones from scratch. All because we believed deep in our bones that freedom isn't something you give away. Not for safety. Not for comfort. Not for anything. Her voice got steadier as she went. The Galactic Council is asking us to abandon that. To hand over our military, our laws, our future, in exchange for their technology and their protection. To become, in every way that matters, their subjects. She paused. My answer is no. Humanity's answer is no. The chamber cracked open. Half the room erupted in cheering, people on their feet, shouting, clapping. The other half was just as loud in the opposite direction. Fear, anger, disbelief. She waited. Let it run its course. Then held up her hand. Quiet came back. I know what we're walking into. I'm not standing here pretending this is easy or that there's no risk. The Council has technology we can't match. They have 8,000 warships. We have 200. I know that. Everyone in this room knows that. She didn't flinch from it. But I also know who we are. We survived ice ages. We outlasted plagues that should have wiped us out. We threw off tyrants, rebuilt after disasters, and somehow, against every odd, made it all the way to the stars. Not because someone handed it to us. Because we refused to stop. She looked directly into the camera. Not at the room anymore. At the world. Ambassador Thelcor, please carry this message back to the Galactic Council. Thank you for your offer. We decline. Earth will remain independent. We are open to a relationship built on equal footing, on mutual respect, but we will not submit to your authority. This is not a negotiating position. This is our answer. 24 hours later, Thelcor was back on every screen. But this time something was different about him. The calm was gone. Those 4 unblinking eyes were sharp now, almost burning. Humanity has made a grave error, he said. No species in 800 years has refused the Council. Not one. Your arrogance is extraordinary, and it will cost you everything. Effective immediately, all trade with human space is forbidden. All travel to your systems is cut off. You are alone. When you are ready to beg for entry on our terms, we may consider your request. Until then you are outcast. The screen went dark again. In a small office inside the UN building, a diplomat sat watching the screen go blank. His junior aide turned to him, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. Sir, what do we do now? The diplomat was quiet for a moment. He'd spent his entire career trying to find middle ground, trying to keep doors open. And now every door had just been slammed shut at once. He looked at his aide and gave a small, tired smile. Now we prove them wrong. We show the galaxy that humanity doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. 18 months. That's how long it had been since the Council slammed the door shut on humanity. And the effects weren't subtle anymore, they were everywhere and they were getting worse. Human colonies scattered across deep space were struggling in ways that nobody had fully predicted. The alien technology that had quietly become part of everyday life. The systems, the parts, the networks, all of it was now out of reach. Trade routes that once moved freely had dried up completely. Resources that used to flow in without much thought were suddenly scarce and getting scarcer. On Mars, the governor was rationing water and oxygen. Not as a precaution. As a necessity. Supply ships from Earth were coming less and less frequently, and the recycling systems that kept the colony alive were starting to break down. Her deputy didn't sugarcoat it during their morning briefing. We're not going to make it, he said flatly. The systems need Zentari replacement parts. The Council has forbidden the Zentari from trading with us. We don't have what we need and we can't get it. The governor stood at the viewport, looking out at the flat, rust-colored Martian surface. Endless and silent and completely indifferent to their problems. Then we fix them ourselves, she said. But we don't have the techno. Then we invent it. She turned around. Get every engineer in this colony into a room together and tell them to figure it out. That's what humans do. We adapt. We find a way. We survive. Back on Earth, things weren't much easier, just a different kind of hard. The president's approval ratings had collapsed. The streets were full of protests. People who had watched the promise of galactic civilization float just within reach, and then watched it get turned away, were angry and frightened and not particularly interested in the long-term reasoning behind the decision. In the Senate, one particular voice had gotten very loud. A senator who had opposed the decision from the start was now leading a push for a vote of no confidence, standing up in session after session to make the same point in increasingly sharp terms. "You have condemned humanity to isolation and poverty," he said during one especially heated exchange. "Our colonies are dying. Our economy is collapsing. All of this, because you were too proud to accept help when it was offered." The president didn't raise her voice. She never did. "We rejected slavery, Senator. Not help. There is a difference." But the pressure kept building. And honestly, it was hard to argue with the fear behind it. People were struggling. Real people in real places going without things they needed. The weight of that was not something anyone in leadership could just brush off. And then quietly something shifted. A cargo ship touched down at the Mars colony in the middle of the night. No transponder signal. No identification. The crew that stepped out wasn't human. They were Zentari, one of the council's own member species. The governor met them personally, alone on the landing pad, the Martian wind cutting across the surface around them. "Why are you here?" she asked. "You could be punished for this. Your whole species could face consequences." The captain clicked his mandibles together. Something that, after a moment, she realized might have been his version of a smile. "Many of us disagree with how the council operates," he said. "What your people did, refusing to submit, it reminded some of us what independence used to feel like. We brought supplies, replacement parts, food synthesizers." He paused. "And information." "What kind of information?" "The council is not as united as they want you to believe. 12 species have quietly expressed support for your position. They are exhausted by council control. They have been for a long time. But they stayed in line because they believed resistance was impossible." He looked at her steadily. "You humans made it look possible." That was the beginning of something neither side could have predicted. A quiet network started taking shape, ships from multiple species making careful, covert runs into human space, carrying supplies, parts, and knowledge. None of them did it openly. The risk was too great. But they did it anyway in the dark, one run at a time. Meanwhile, human engineers were doing something remarkable with whatever they could get their hands on. Salvaged parts got reverse engineered. Designs got studied, taken apart, rebuilt from scratch, and sometimes improved in the process. Necessity has a way of pushing people past what they thought they were capable of. Within a year, human ships were coming out of construction yards faster and more efficiently than before, built entirely from components that humans had designed themselves. Earth's chief diplomat had become the quiet center of the whole covert operation, meeting with contacts from half a dozen species, building something fragile but real. During one of those meetings, he sat across from the Zentari captain and asked the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for months. How many species are actually content under council control? The captain was quiet for a moment. Happy? Almost none. But they comply because they see no other option. The council has the military, the economic leverage. They have spent centuries making sure everyone believes that resistance leads only to ruin. The diplomat leaned back and let out a slow breath. "Well," he said, "we're proving that wrong. One day at a time." 2 years after humanity said no, the galaxy started saying it too. It began with the Taurans, a quiet, agricultural people living out on the far edge of galactic space. Small civilization. No military to speak of. Not the kind of species anyone would have expected to make a move like this. But they did. Their leader stood up and, through a translator, said the words that the council had never heard directed at them before. "We have watched the humans endure isolation and hardship rather than surrender their freedom. If they can resist, so can we. The Tauran people will govern themselves from this day forward." The council's response came fast. Brutally fast. 50 warships. Jumping straight into Tauran space with a single set of orders: force compliance. The Taurans had no defense fleet. No military infrastructure. No way to fight back. What was coming wasn't a battle. It was a statement. A reminder to every species in the galaxy about what happened when you stepped out of line. The president got the news in the middle of the night. Emergency briefing, half her cabinet pulled from sleep, tactical displays lighting up the walls. 6 hours, the general said. That's how long before the council fleet reaches Tora. The Taurans are completely defenseless. They're asking for help. How many ships can we get there in time? 15. Maybe 20 if we pull from other sectors. But we'd be outgunned 3-1. And the moment we engage council forces, he paused, that's open war. The room was quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. Everyone was waiting to see what she'd do with it. The president looked around the table slowly. At her Secretary of State. At her general. At her admiral. The Council is about to destroy an entire civilization for daring to want freedom, she said. If we stand here and watch that happen, we're not just letting the Taurans die. We're telling every species in this galaxy that might makes right. That freedom only exists when the powerful decide to allow it. She stood up. Send the fleet. Everything available. We are not letting this happen. 6 hours later, 15 human warships dropped out of hyperspace and placed themselves between the Tauran homeworld and the incoming Council armada. The Admiral opened a channel. This is the United Earth Fleet. You are ordered to withdraw from Tauran space immediately. The Council commander didn't even try to hide what he thought of that. You have no authority here, human. Leave now or be destroyed alongside the Taurans. We're not leaving, the Admiral said, completely calm. And you're not destroying anyone today. Final warning, withdraw or we engage. They attacked. 50 ships against 15. On paper, it shouldn't have lasted 20 minutes. But humans don't fight the way other species expect them to. The Earth ships didn't form battle lines. They scattered immediately, pulling the Council fleet's attention in a dozen directions at once. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot around for attack angles that made no tactical sense until suddenly they did. They launched drones designed to mimic warship signatures, flooding Council targeting systems with false readings. And they moved together like something between a wolf pack and a swarm, 3 or 4 ships converging on a single Council vessel, hitting hard, then breaking away before the response could land, already moving to the next target. The small fighter craft were the worst of it for the Council. Fast, unpredictable, swarming the big battleships like they had something to prove, because they did. They went for engines, weapon systems, crippling ships rather than destroying them, which somehow felt more unsettling than outright destruction. 2 hours in, 12 Council ships were gone and 20 more were dead in space. The Admiral got back on the channel. Commander, you've lost 12 ships. 20 more are out of the fight. Withdraw now while you still have something left to withdraw with. The Council fleet turned around. And the galaxy watched every second of it. News traveled fast out there. Within hours, every species with a receiver knew what had just happened. Humanity, the isolated, dismissed, embargoed species that was supposed to have learned its lesson by now, had just turned back a Council enforcement fleet. Not a skirmish. A proper engagement. 50 ships sent to make a point and they came home early. The political aftershock was immediate. 3 weeks. That's all it took. 4 more species announced their independence. The Calathi, the Dren, the Porathai, the Shem. Each one standing up and pointing in one way or another at what humanity had done. Each one deciding that if it was possible, if resistance wasn't just a death sentence, then maybe it was worth trying. The Galactic Council had not faced anything like this in 800 years. Their authority, which they had treated as permanent and absolute, was developing cracks in real time. And they knew exactly who to blame for it. The Council's emergency session was unlike anything in its 800-year history. Hundreds of representatives, all talking at once, all trying to make themselves heard over the noise of a situation that had completely spiraled beyond what any of them had planned for. They were calling it the human contagion, which honestly said everything about how they saw it, not as a political movement, not as a legitimate response to how they'd been running things, but as a disease. Something that had spread from one stubborn species and infected the rest of the galaxy. Some of them wanted to end it immediately. Full military response. Hit Earth hard enough to make the whole galaxy flinch and remember why nobody defied the Council. Make an example. Make it final. Others weren't so sure. Ambassador Thelkor, the same one who had delivered that very first ultimatum to Earth, who had stood on every screen in the world and laid out humanity's 2 choices, stood up and said what nobody else in that room wanted to hear. We have a simple choice in front of us. Escalate to full war and try to force humanity back into submission. Or we negotiate. Negotiate. One of the elder members looked at him like he'd suggested something offensive. They defied us. They attacked our fleet. They defended another species from our aggression, Thelkor said evenly. And they won. More importantly, 6 species have now declared independence following their example. If we move against Earth, how many more follow? How many of our own member species are already quietly on their side? That question settled over the room like a fog. Everyone knew the answer. They just didn't want to say it out loud. Probably dozens. Maybe more. On Earth, the president was in the middle of a late afternoon briefing when an unexpected transmission came through. Private channel. No formal council header. Just Thelkor speaking without the weight of official authority behind him, which was somehow more unnerving than when he had it. President Hayes, he said. The council wishes to discuss terms. She didn't skip a beat. Terms of our surrender? Terms of coexistence. Pause. Your refusal to submit has changed things. The old order can no longer hold. The council is prepared to consider reforms. 3 months of negotiations followed. They took place on a neutral station, somewhere between human space and council territory, representatives from Earth, from the newly independent species, and from the council itself, all in the same room, all trying to figure out what came next. The president led the human side personally. She brought her diplomat and her general, because she wanted both perspectives at the table at all times. It was hard going. The council kept reaching for ways to hold on to some version of the authority they'd always had. The human delegation kept pushing the same point back. Complete sovereignty for every species, no exceptions, no asterisks. Deals got made and then fell apart. Positions hardened and then slowly softened. The whole thing nearly collapsed twice. But something emerged from it. The council would survive, but not as it had been. No more absolute authority. No more dictating to civilizations how they had to live, what laws they had to follow, what military decisions they had to hand over. Instead, it would become something more like a meeting place. An organization that helped sovereign species cooperate when they wanted to, with no power to compel anyone to do anything. Trade, alliances, laws, all of that would be decided by individual civilizations on their own terms. One of the elder council members shook his head slowly during one of the final sessions. What you're describing is chaos. Without central authority there will be conflicts. Disorder. Wars. The president looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said simply. There will be challenges. But there will also be freedom. And we believe freedom is worth the risk. The treaty was signed 6 months later. The Galactic Council became the Federation of Free Worlds. Membership was voluntary. No species had to join and no species could be commanded by it. Decisions required genuine consensus, not orders handed down from above. Humanity became a founding member, alongside every species that had found the courage to stand up and say enough. After the signing ceremony, Thelcor found the president standing alone near one of the station's wide observation windows, looking out at the stars. You've destroyed an 800-year-old institution, he said quietly. She shook her head. We reminded the galaxy what that institution should have been from the beginning. A partnership between equals. Not a system where some species get to decide how everyone else lives. He was quiet for a long moment. When I delivered that first ultimatum, he said finally, I was certain you would submit. Every species before you had. I thought your refusal was arrogance. Maybe foolishness. And now? He looked out at the stars alongside her. Now I think we forgot something that should never have been forgotten. Freedom is not a privilege that powerful institutions get to hand out or take away. It's a right. And your species never stopped believing that, even when believing it was dangerous. Even when it cost you. He paused. You reminded the rest of us what we had given up without even noticing. Years later, at the Federation headquarters, they put up a wall. A memorial of sorts, marking where everything had changed. And carved into it were these words. In the year 2247, humanity was offered a choice. Submit or stand alone. They chose freedom. In doing so, they freed the galaxy. May we never forget that liberty, once surrendered, is rarely regained. And may we always honor those who refuse to bow, for they remind us what it means to be truly free. The council had wanted submission. Humanity had said no. And that one word, that single, quiet, unshakable no, had changed everything.